Hi, everyone. I really appreciate Snea and the entire B-Sides team having me here. And thank you for letting me present virtually, because sometimes you just can't make it to the place you really want to be at. So this talk is called Adding DAST to CI/CD. So adding DAST as in like a dynamic application security testing tool. Sometimes people will say, oh yeah, web app scanner. And I sort of mean that, yes. But I started writing this out, and then I remembered when people first started adding DASTs to pipelines where I worked, and I was the person adding them. And it didn't happen exactly like this, but it felt a bit like this. So I was like, I've added the scanner to your pipeline. And the software developers were like, it is too slow. This is taking forever. And then we went through the results, and there was a false positive in the tool because I was using a free tool. It was perhaps I thought it was amazing at the time, right? And I'm like, but I found 8 real bugs automatically. But they were like, it's too slow, and it felt like one false positive breaking the build is not acceptable. So then I was like, I should change the name of this talk from just adding DAST to CI/CD without losing any friends. Because if you don't have a good relationship with the software developers, and if you're doing DevOps with the ops team, so not only are you not going to be able to have coffee with the cool kids, but on top of that, it's like really hard to get your job done without, I'm taking off my sweater because when I talk, I like move around a lot and I get really warm. But it's really hard to get the things you want done without ticking everyone off if you're not careful. And so we're going to talk about different ways that you can do that. So you can put this tool in a pipeline and get really good results, but also all the places not in a pipeline that you can put it, but still automate it and still get good results. And a whole bunch of just other tests you can do, etc. So like, who's this person that's friends with Snea? So I am a giant nerd, and I'm the director of developer relations and community at Bright Security. I founded the SheHacksPurple community, where you can take a bunch of training courses for free. About software security, my obsession. I'm on the internet. I wrote a book called Alice and Bob Learn AppSec. So the main gist of this slide is that I'm a nerd on the internet. I've been a nerd for a really long time, and I'm hoping that you will sit through my presentation and give me a chance because you're like, she seems pretty competent. So that is me, where I have slightly longer hair. Okay. So what problem are we trying to solve? Because all of these talks that you saw, we're trying to solve a problem. And one of my main things I want to solve just in my career is insecure software. It's causing data breaches around the world. It's the number one cause of data breaches. It's not the number one cause of it's not the number one cause of security incidents. It's not the number one cause of people having their money stolen. It's people stealing all of your data, which is the most damaging type of security incident you can have. I would like us to not win this occasion every year. So every year, Verizon, which is an American company, makes this breach report, and they've been doing it since 2008. And pretty much every year, insecure software wins the worst title of being the number one cause of data breaches. And I want us to do better. Another problem we're trying to solve is if we're going to work in a DevOps shop and we're going to try to make their software more secure, we need our tools to be accurate. We need them to go really fast. And whatever we can do, we need to automate. So there's going to be way more DevOps people than security people. It's just a fact. There's way more software developers than AppSec people. GitHub released a report in January that said, so it used to be 1 to 100. So there'd be one AppSec person for every dev. Now it's 500 to 1. Those are not great odds. So we need to be accurate, but we need to also be fast and try to automate. And so if we want to do DevSecOps, so us security folks doing security in a DevOps environment, we need to test from multiple angles. So we can't just do one test and be like, I'm sure it's fine. That's not good enough. We need to have good relationships between security, dev, and ops. And I don't mean that like you have to give them hugs or you go grocery shopping with them. But I mean that we have to be able to work with them and have a good relationship. So I can say things like, hey, did you see those test results? And the person answers, something like, yeah, I did. Or I got the email. I haven't had a chance to read it yet. Or yeah, I've been meaning to talk to you. I need them to not answer with, go to hell, Tanya. You broke our pipeline again. I need to maintain a good relationship so I can get my job done. I have worked at places where the security team and the software developers were like this, just all the time. And I spent like half of every week just trying to put out angry emotional fires of people that didn't trust each other, that didn't like working together, etc. And so if you have a good relationship, you get twice as much done. And then the last thing is I want bugs fixed as soon as possible. And I don't mean I want them fixed on Monday instead of Friday. I mean, if we're following the system development lifecycle, so if you're doing waterfall, it's like this. It's like requirements, design, coding, testing, release. If you're doing agile, you do that same thing, but you do it in a circle and you release a whole bunch of times. If you're doing DevOps, you do the eternity symbol where you're like, yep, got it, releasing it, got it, releasing it, got it, release it. And you just continue to release over and over again, even more often than agile. And so automation is our only way that we can keep up with those people. And I want them fixing those bugs as soon as we find them or as soon as they have time. I don't want things waiting until later. I don't want the software developers or the operations folks thinking like, is Tanya ever going to tell me what's wrong? Is she ever going to do a test? Like, where is that lady? I want to be there for them and I want them to know that I can help. And so fixing bugs as soon as possible in the system development lifecycle, the reason I want that is because it is way cheaper. It's way, way cheaper that way. So today we're going to zero in specifically on DAST. So Bright Security bought my company a few weeks ago and they make a DAST. And so when they're like, you're going to start applying to companies, what do you want to talk about? I'm like, I want to talk about DAST and how people can do it right. Because I see a lot of people buy tools and they don't do it right and they don't get good results. I want people to get better results. So what the heck is DAST? So it stands for Dynamic Application Security Testing. What it means is that your app needs to be running. So it could be localhost, it could be a web server, it could be a container, a platform as a service. It doesn't matter, but your app is running. Like you can see the software in a browser. And then it sends requests at your app to try to find security vulnerabilities. Your app responds and it goes back and forth like this. It can also do APIs where it sends requests to your APIs, it receives the response, it goes back and forth. And the idea is it's sort of a computer conversation. And it just keeps trying to find all your vulnerabilities. And it does this in an automated way. So it's like, hey, how's it going? Oh, it's not going so well. Oh, is it going like this? Okay, yeah. And then from that conversation, it starts crafting better and better tests. It automates this for you. So you could just like sit back and be like, oh, okay, this is happening. That's good. It's different than static testing or software composition analysis that requires a copy of your code. So I used to be a pentester and they wouldn't give me a copy of the code. So I had to do all my tests in a dynamic manner where I was trying to talk to the app either manually or with a DAST tool. But the idea is it interacts with your app to try to find out what's wrong. And so why did I decide to zero in on that? So I was a software developer for around 17 years. I briefly took a break as a sysadmin and then came back to software, my true love. And basically, I started when I moved into security with a dynamic scanner. I found it way easier than static analysis or software composition analysis. I found it easier than trying to figure out, like, is this a secret? Is this not a secret? I thought it was the easiest one. And I find a lot of people who are first getting into these things, they find it easy too. So maybe I'm not supposed to admit this, but like the first time I ran a DAST and then I found vulnerabilities, I'm like, I'm a hacker! It felt very exciting. And I know that might sound silly because I'm like, in my mid 40s and I've been doing this a long time, but I don't know how to explain. Whenever I find stuff, I'm like, yeah, that's right. I'm awesome. But the last one, which is probably the most important one, is that your app is out there sitting on the internet. Your API, unless it has a gateway in front of it or a bunch of firewalls in front of it, is out there sitting on the internet. And on the internet, anyone can point a DAST at it and scan it. If you have a WAF or you have other defenses, you could probably shoo it away. But most of the internet doesn't have a web application firewall or a runtime application security protection tool. So like a shield for your app. Most of the internet doesn't have that. And so that means basically anyone with very little skill can just point a dynamic scanner at you and find vulnerabilities that are usually exploitable. And so it's the most obvious place to start because that's where bad guys start. Unless you're open source, they don't have a copy of your code. Unless they're an insider threat, they can't test from the inside. So a DAST can just test from anywhere on the planet, and it doesn't take very long to find problems. And so I want us to fix those problems first because they are the most evident to people that might be malicious. And so what is DevOps? So this is a very short and small summary. So DevOps is, spoiler alert, it's not paying one person to do two jobs. That's not what it is. So basically DevOps is a newer way to create software. It's a methodology and it's a culture. So you follow certain processes, people act and feel certain ways, and you often use certain tools to reinforce it. So we're going to talk about it a bit more. So sometimes people will say it's people, products, and processes. I don't really like that. I like the idea of us following the 3 ways of DevOps, but I digress. Next slide. So first of all, if you're doing DevOps, you usually have a CI/CD. So it's continuous integration, continuous delivery, or continuous deployment, depending upon how you're using it. But it's automated software that tests and releases your software and your infrastructure to different environments. So it takes a copy of your code and builds it and tests it. And then it's like, oh, I'm going to put it on a dev server. I'm going to test it again. Oh, I'm going to build it. Like, I'm going to take that artifact. I'm going to copy it to the QA server. I'm going to run even more tests. And it does this with your infrastructure as well. It can actually build the infrastructure and then plop your app on it and test them together. And I think it's quite nifty. So then if we want to do DevOps, there are the 3 ways of DevOps. So sort of like the 3 rules. You need to kind of do these things if you want to get all the value that you can of DevOps. And so the first one is efficiency for the entire system. And so when I see that, I'm like, not just your part, Tanya. You have to like share with everyone. And so that's important. Fast feedback. And so then I added to that is accurate and gets to the right people. It's nice if there's fast feedback that gets to the right people, but if there's fast feedback but it's totally inaccurate, or like you can't actually see it, or you have to attend 20 meetings to get a copy, that's not fast feedback. And then the third way is continuous learning and improvement of your daily work. Sometimes people call this risk taking, but the idea is that you step back from your daily activities and exert effort to making your daily activities even better on a regular basis, usually every month. The last thing I want to say about DevOps is that not all security testing needs to be done in the pipeline for you to be doing DevOps. So you can do brief checks in the pipeline and then do like slow checks overnight. Like there's a lot of different options. And so we're going to talk about that. So let's talk strategy for putting a dynamic scanner in your CI/CD. So the first one that I see the most often, the one that I did at the beginning that made all the other devs pretty ticked off at me, was to run my DAST on full blast and then lose all your friends. So what I mean by this is turning it on, saying do every test, catalog all my different links, test every single part of my whole app as thoroughly as you possibly can. And then it might run like 6 hours or something. And no one's impressed by that. If the pipeline previously ran 18 minutes and now it runs 6 hours and 18 minutes, no one's going to be very cool with that. So this is not the one you want to do in the release pipeline. So the release pipeline is the one that everyone's using to release all their code. So what you could do instead of this is that you could take a copy of the release pipeline, put it underneath in your CI/CD software, and then make it so it doesn't release, or it just releases to one safe place where you can do security testing, and you put it there and you run the security test, and then that's it. And then the results go to the software developers or goes to the security person so that they can see it and take action. So that would be a better way to do it. So you're not blocking production, but you can still get a very thorough test done. So sometimes this is called a parallel pipeline or an asynchronous pipeline, and you can run it nice and long and slow, and you could run it like every night or every Friday and have those results get sent somewhere for someone to manually look through that. So the next thing you could do is you could refine your scope by using a HAR file. So HAR, H-A-R, stands for HTML archive file. So if your software developer, your QA team are doing something, using something like Selenium to do automated tests of your app, you can get a copy of that file. That's a HAR file that they're recording when they do all of that cool automation. You can feed that into your dynamic scanner, and then it will just do that test. You can basically make your test 30% of the time, like instead it's like 70% faster, or even faster than that, because you're just testing whatever new feature you're releasing, or you're just testing the new code, or you're just testing what the QA person thinks is important. And is this complete coverage? No, but this would be part of the coverage you do. So it's like, we're just going to test this in the pipeline very quickly. It's going to take 6 minutes. And if you break, like if you do get a high or a critical illness, we're going to break the build. But for all the other testing, we're going to do it outside the pipeline. And we still might come to you and need fixes, but this is what we think is an emergency. And so it goes in the pipeline. Another thing you can do, so when I first showed this slide to people, they were like, you can't just test only what you want to test, Tanya. I'm like, sometimes you can. So quite often when I work places, we'll have specific vulnerabilities we're targeting or types of bugs that we're targeting that are really important to us that we feel are particularly dangerous or we see a lot of. And so in the pipeline, I might just test for those, like just injection or just cross-site scripting, and that's it. Or maybe we have like a new security policy and we just want to target in on security headers and like no one's using security headers. So we just test for that. And it's like, you know what? You're breaking the policy. You know, we're all looking for this, so you can't go to prod. But then I do my other extensive testing outside of prod. And so that way, what you could do is slowly eliminate a certain type of bug. And then in a few weeks, you change to a new vulnerability that you're looking for. And that would be really, really fast. Another thing you can do that I think everyone should do every single time is only do technology specific tests. So let's say you have a WordPress application or website. You would only do you would do the WordPress sites, but you wouldn't do an MS SQL test because you would be running Postgres because that is what WordPress runs on. You wouldn't do a Ruby on Rails test, right? Because you're using WordPress and so on. And so you just do the technology tests that are specific to what you're doing. And so I always want to do this. So if I'm scanning an app that's made in Node.js, and it's using MongoDB, I definitely want to do all the specific tests for those. And I'll do other tests that apply to every type of website. But I'm like, oh, no MS SQL, no WordPress tests, no this, no that. And I just throw them in the garbage because I know they just don't apply. Like if you're in Azure, you don't need to do AWS tests, right? And so this is something that I generally do all the time because our time is valuable. We're busy people. I wanted to say a quick note on testing APIs. If you want to test an API with a dynamic scanner in a pipeline or not in a pipeline, it's very, very important that your schema file or your definition file, your open API file, your Swagger file, whatever you want to call the thing that defines your API, it needs to be complete. And you can complete it using a linter. And so some dynamic scanners have a linter built into them, like Bright does. There's a few that do that. And so you just open up your API, or there's separate like software things that just lint your API. And they're very, very thorough. And so basically you use one of those and you open up your definition file and it will tell you things that are missing. And so I used to be a dev and I did all of the mistakes that I tell people not to do now because I went to college in the 90s for software development. And so I never learned that. I had to learn it on my own. And so it will do things like, let's say you've declared a variable and the variable is date of birth. So usually people will be like date of birth, type, date, and that's it. But the scanner needs to know, well, what's the maximum date? What's the minimum date? Can it only be in the past? Can a person be 5,000 years old? What is the format of the date, etc.? So if you don't fill those out, the dynamic scanner can't test that for you. And so usually if you just take an open API file or Swagger file and you plug it in, most DAST scanners kind of barf. They don't know what to do and they're like, yeah, it looks good to me, I guess, because your file is not complete. So you need to use a linter on it to make sure it is complete. And when you make it complete, like when you add the maximums and minimums and the file type, the formats, etc., you're making your app more secure. So your API will be able to defend itself because it has input validation available to it now because you just defined that. But without that, that means someone like me could go in and say, oh, okay, so yeah, I'm 4,000 years old. How's that for you? Okay, cool. And that might break your application eventually. And so it is important to do linting on your API definition files. Okay, so the other thing is you don't have to put everything in the DAST. So what you could do, let's say you've decided to record a HAR file and you're only going to do technology-specific tasks, and then you're going to do other things. So what are other ways that you can use a DAST that's automated that goes with CI/CD? So we talked briefly about how you can make a copy of the pipeline and not release it anywhere. Just put it somewhere that you can do security testing. You can even like create a container, load it up, add your app to it, pew, 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 do all your testing, then release those resources out back into the cloud and finish and just have your test results. So you can do that without blocking releases. But what other things we could do? So first of all, you can have scheduled, automated, regular scanning. So I like to do this at least once a month for all my apps that are currently in production and all the APIs. So have scans, like a scan runs every night of the month. And that report comes in and someone looks at it and decides if it thinks those are real vulnerabilities or maybe some of them are false positives, depending upon the type of tool you're using. And then put those things in the backlog and then go talk to teams about it. So if you have 30 apps, you could run one every night and you just have to look at one report per day, except on Mondays, you have to look at 3 reports. But the point is that then you would be able to make sure every app is having thorough testing and it's still automated. It's happening while you're not at work. No one's waiting for those resources. So this is a thing I see a lot at a lot of companies. Another thing you can do is one-off or manual scans. So last year, I helped some companies do M&A, so mergers and acquisitions, and they're like, we're going to buy, these companies. And so I went and I just used a DAST scanner on all the different apps. And I was like, okay, so this one's going to cost like tons of money to fix. I found like 100 vulnerabilities. This one, I only found 6. I think we could fix this very quickly. I don't think it'll cost that much, etc. And so I used a whole bunch of different types of scanning tools to do an assessment for them of the state of security at that company, and then they renegotiated the price. And whenever I get a tool, the first thing I do is play with it manually because I want to know like how it works and how I can make it go faster and how I can make it find more things. And so usually whenever you get a tool, the first thing you do is manual testing. So there's still a space for that in our industry. There is still people doing that every day. Another thing you can do, so every pen tester ever basically, they use a DAST tool and they do manual testing. So they'll use a scanner. That's usually what we call it. They're like, oh yeah, I'm still doing quick scans to like check and see if there's anything that I might have missed with my eyes. But sometimes a DAST scanner will find something that manual testing doesn't and vice versa. So you get a much better, more complete result when you have a person who's a security expert doing manual testing as well. But it's expensive and it takes weeks. And so you have to choose where you do that. Like most companies can't afford to do a pen test everywhere. So you use a lot of dynamic scanning quite regularly. And then you do like spot pen tests or just the ones that have to be PCI compliant or whatever the case is where you work. I want to remind you that you still have to do other types of testing. We can't only do dynamic testing. So there's static testing where it just looks at the code that your team wrote, which is called SAST. There's software composition analysis, where it just looks at your dependencies, your libraries, your frameworks, any code your team didn't write, but that is part of your app to see if it's known to be vulnerable. There's IAST, which is interactive application security testing, where basically it's a binary and you put it inside your app and it tests as you use your app. There's, wrong button. There's secret scanning, where it just looks through your entire code base and it tries to find secrets. So this could be an API key, an API secret, a password, a connection string, etc. Anything like that shouldn't be kept in your code. It should be in a secret management tool. And so that is really cool. We want to do these tests or some of these tests as well. So these are places where you can do dynamic scanning. So you could do security regression testing with unit tests. Because the unit test, basically your IDE creates a little baby mini web server and you can do security tests there for the first time. Then you can do dynamic scanning against your like your dev server or your local host. Then in the testing phase, you can do, a full blast DAST. I didn't mean that for it to rhyme, but it just does. And you could also do a manual penetration test in a pipeline. So the release phase and maintenance phase is where you use pipelines. So that's where you want to tune your DAST and just do certain types of tests. And then you could do scheduled weekly tests after it's released into production. I was talking about like how the first time I ran a DAST, how I felt. So I felt kind of like this, a little like that. I really was like, I am a hacker now. This is awesome. And so I feel like it's really fun, and I know that I'm silly, and that is okay. But when I first ran one, it was just so fun, and I felt so amazing that I found security vulnerabilities that as a dev I never found before. And so then as a dev, I started doing scans, and I started teaching other devs to do scanning, and you could find a lot of stuff. So with a quick conclusion, because we only have 2 minutes left, we need to do dynamic scanning because any person on the internet can do a dynamic scan of our app, and we need to keep ahead of those people. Automation is our friend, but if you are at B-Sides, you already know that. Dynamics testing in a pipeline, it has to be fast and it has to be accurate, or no one's going to want to hang out with you at lunch. All the DevOps people are going to be like, nope, there's Tanya. She broke our pipeline. Nope, this seat's taken, Missy. We can do dynamics testing outside of the pipeline, but still be DevOps friendly. That is okay. We're not breaking any rules. Other types of testing are still needed so that we can find as many vulnerabilities as possible and make our app as safe as we can. And basically, I'm pretty silly. That's a thing you probably have picked up on already. But anyway, I have a couple free resources I want to give you. Some are free. The books are not free, but everything else is free. So first of all, I have a podcast, the SheHacksPurple podcast, where this season we're learning little tiny security lessons. So you can subscribe on any platform or watch it on YouTube. These are all books about DevOps, except mine, which is about security, and I have a chapter about DevOps. I think we can't do IT right. I think we can't do security right unless we're doing IT right. And I think DevOps is the most efficient and effective and, quite frankly, fun way to make software. The SheHacksPurple community is free. There's like no upsell or anything. It is just free. We have little meetups on the internet. Sometimes we meet up in person. We have articles. We have blogs. We have lots of conversations and problem solving. And we have a ton of free courses in there. And so everyone is invited to that. Every Monday, this is what Sneha was talking about on Twitter, is Cyber Mentoring Monday, where basically we use this hashtag and we respond to, so I always do a tweet to try to start off a thread, but basically people reach out and say, I need a professional mentor, and other people from within the industry swoop in and help them. And sometimes they become their mentor, sometimes they become their friend, sometimes they have a virtual coffee with them and suggest a bunch of books that really change their career, and maybe it could help you. Resources Bright. So Bright has a highly technical blog with a lot of information about like every type of vulnerability and how to fix it. So that's pretty handy. And Resources Me. I am SheHacksPurple, basically on all the platforms you can think of. I have a newsletter, a website, a YouTube, blah, 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 blah. Mostly I hang out on Twitter. And with this, I'd like to say thank you so much. Thank you to the entire B-Sides organizing crew, because without them, this conference would not happen. Thank you to all of you for attending. Being in person is an important way to do community building. And thank you to the entire international B-Sides community that encourages different cities around the world to do this. I'm Tanya Janca, and thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much, Tanya. That was fantastic. I guess she deserves a louder round of applause. Can we have a louder round of applause, please, for Tanya? Wow, that's fantastic. Thank you so much. Tanya is still with us. Do you have questions for her? If yes, please do come forward. Any questions for Tanya? Yes, please.
Thank you for the nice presentation. It was really enlightening, I would say. Just one point. When you mentioned that someone needs to write the test for the APIs like I described them, usually who is doing that? I'm trying to imagine is a security person that's doing that, some from the QA team. So who is actually describing the API so that when we run the DAST, we know that it's complete?
Ideally, the software developers would do that part. Ideally, so every organization is different, but where I've worked, it's generally the software developers that are responsible for adding those parts. But quite frankly, usually it's the security team that notices they're missing. Because when I was a dev or a software developer, I say dev a lot, I didn't know to do that. I was like, it works. It does all the things my client asked for. It's perfect. And it wasn't until I became friends with an ethical hacker, and he's like, actually, it does do all the things you need it to do, but it does a lot of stuff it's not supposed to do. And I'm like, really? And so usually it's the security team that starts asking for linting. It really depends, because there's a lot of software developers that are very security obsessed. And so they might start doing it themselves. But if you want everyone in your entire organization to be doing it, you usually have to provide a tool for all the software developers, give them a lesson on what you expect from them, because otherwise what you receive will be very different depending upon what type of experience each dev has. Does that answer your question?
Yes. So just to confirm, the way I understand it, I would need to enroll the developers or to sell this idea to them and say, hey, as part of the development process, we also need to think about writing tests that the DAST can use or tool. That would be it.
Oh, so they don't have to write a test. The DAST writes the test. What they need to do is lint their definition file. So you open it up in something like 42 Crunch or Bright or something else like that. And then it tells you this API definition is incomplete. And it'll actually give you code you can copy and paste. And it'll say stuff like, okay, so this is a string, cool. What's the maximum length of this string? What's the minimum length of this string? Are there any, which characters should be allowed in this string? And so you'll say, let's say like lowercase a through to z, uppercase a through to z, and then 0 through to 9. Then it won't let any other characters in there. Does that make sense?
Okay, now it's clear. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. That was a great question.
Hi, Tanya. I love cats, though. Thank you a lot. Question about trying to scale and trying to roll out. Dynamic software testing is awesome, and I want to offer that to my dev teams. So I go to the people that prioritize stuff like that into the backlog, and then I have 5 POs sitting in front of me, of which I need 1 volunteer, and all of them think, if I go and volunteer for this, I can throw away all my roadmap for my products and features. How do you get over that first step of them being scared of you?
So when the first time I was on a security team, I had been on the software development team at that same company. So they all already knew me by name. Like I already would eat lunch with them or hang out with them. So they all already knew me. So it wasn't as intimidating for them. But then when I went on to the next company, none of the software developers knew me. And so what I did is I started giving little presentations about the things I wanted. And so the presentation would always start with like, this is a big problem that I see. And I wouldn't say like at our company, I'd be like on the internet. I'd be like, there's, like injection vulnerabilities on the internet. And this is how it works. And this is how scary it is. And like, let's do one together. And then I'd be like, but we could stop it from happening here. And then I would show them what they could do to help stop it. Like I can test for it and find it, but you could prevent it in the first place. And I would kind of just try to show it to them and make them as excited as I was, if that makes sense. And like show them my passion about it. And right now you're like, oh, she seems like a really good presenter. Yeah, I sucked. I was really not good when I started. I have been doing this for like 8 or 9 years now. And so when I present, I'm really comfortable and I'm not like super nervous where I feel like I can't breathe and my heart's beating super fast. But even when I was like not very good at presenting, they could tell I really, really cared about it. And that's why I was showing them. And so the first couple of times I presented, I really thought I was going to die, but I didn't, clearly, because I'm still alive. And it turned out like they wanted to know, if that makes sense. And they're like, yeah, you seem really like worried about this. Like, I am. And so that's what's worked for me, is just showing them the thing. Sometimes people, like I've worked at places where the security team says, we do this now and you have to do that. And they don't explain it. And I find it doesn't go very well. So I always try to explain why we want to do it, how to do it, and I will help you. And then if someone gets stuck, I just like run over to their desk and help them. And I keep doing that until they're like, I don't need you, Tanya, go away. Stop being like hovering over me. I got this. And then eventually the software developers are better at it than I am. And they don't need me anymore for that thing. But for me, I've had a lot of luck with presenting the problem and like, this is what I think can help. And I need all of your help to get this done. Does that help you?
Hopefully, yeah, we'll see. But thank you.
Okay, good luck. I actually have 2 presentations that I open sourced in my GitHub. So if you go to github.com and then /SheHacksPurple, I have a project there of presentations where I teach you how to give my presentation to your devs. And so I have 2 so far there. And a lot of people have told me like, yeah, I wanted to get the devs interested. And so it's like my slides, it's a video of me doing it. Then it's a video of me saying what to say for each slide and what you're trying to accomplish. And then I have a description of the whole thing. And so you could try one of those if you don't know what to present, because I didn't know what to present when I started. Yeah. Are there any other questions?
If there are no further questions, or Tanya is still here, does anybody have any other question? All right, great, Tanya. Thank you so much for explaining us, because when it comes to product security, DAST scanning, the entire CI/CD pipeline is super critical for everyone, not just the engineers or the developers, but even for the security professionals or the security engineers. Call it like that. Sometimes there's one quick question for you. With the DAST scanning involving in the entire pipeline, how do we basically handle these vulnerabilities in a way that we are still friends with the developers and not just bombard them? Because sometimes it might happen that we say, oh, that vulnerability is super critical. It's got like the CVSS score, like say, for example, 9.6. You need to fix it in 2 days or 1 day. So how do we still try to deliver this? How do we rely exactly on DAST scan? Whereas, and how do we convince our developers that, even though it's a high vulnerability, the tool says it's super critical, but based on this, can you explain how do we maintain the relationship still happy and nice?
So I usually try to give the developers a license for the tool I'm using so that if they want to, they can test it earlier. So if they want to, when they put it on their dev server or their local host, they can run the test themselves. So when they get to the CI/CD pipeline, it's like a double check, if that makes sense. I've had a lot of developers say they feel it's embarrassing if they break the build. And so they would rather have access to look at it themselves first. So if I can afford it, I get them all tools or licenses. And then another thing is I usually start with not breaking the build. I work up to it. So first we're just running scans manually and I'm showing them results and asking them to fix things. Then I start testing a little bit, just like a couple of things in the pipeline. And then and I just alert. I'm like, alert, this is a high. Alert, this is this. And I try to have sort of 2 different service level agreements once we start having one. So at first, it's like anything that was already there, you have months to fix. But any new vulnerabilities that are higher critical, you're not allowed those. So I will break the build if a new critical vulnerability comes into it. So at first, no breaking. And then at first, I'm only breaking on new things that are very high, then new things that are just high, and then new things maybe that are medium, depending upon what level that you need. And then the stuff that's in the backlog, the stuff that was there before we had a scanner, I give them more time and we talk about those over time because they're already out there in prod. And us not letting them go to prod with those old vulnerabilities that are already out there doesn't really make a lot of sense. Like I want them to fix all of it now, but I know that they can't, especially if they're currently doing a project and no project time has been allocated to do security bug fixing. Another thing I do is I go talk to all the project managers and I tell them, I want to be at all your project kickoff meetings and I want to have a 2-week sprint, at least one, that is just to fix bugs. And so maybe like 4 months in or something, we have a sprint where for 2 straight weeks or 3 weeks, however long your sprints are, all you do is fix bugs that I found. And so I get ready in advance so they have lots of work to do during that time. And then they just fix lots of bugs. So by the time they go out to production with everything, it's like pretty good. Do you know what I mean? And so I try to get there earlier and be there and talk to them the whole way through the project. And I don't mean every single day, but like check-ins quite regularly. And then by the time they get to the end, it's usually really good. With legacy software, it's different. So software that's already existed, I try to be a lot more patient because usually fixing like a dependency, it could mean, you know, if the dependency is really old, like we saw during Log4j in December, it could be a complete re-architecting of the whole app to update that. And so sometimes I negotiate, if it's really, really, really bad, I'll say, okay, well, I need $5,000 from your project team so that I can put a web app firewall or a RASP or something in front of your app because it's so dangerous having it on the internet. And then you have, you know, this long to fix things. But if you won't let me put a WAF in front of it, then you only have this long to fix things. And then they're usually like, we found $5,000, Tanya. So I try to like negotiate with them and realize that they have other priorities and I'm just one of those priorities. And then things usually go better. And there's some teams where they're just like, no, go away. You're wasting my time. I don't want to talk to you. And those are the most difficult ones. And that's where I have to be like mean, Tanya. And I like first start off really nice, but then eventually I'm like, I'm here to bother you because you still haven't fixed those things. And like 5 separate times I've visited you. And eventually I'm going to visit your boss, right? Like you're forcing me to do this because you're not holding up your end of the bargain. Like, is that what you want? Because that's not what I want. That sucks. We'll never be friends if I just talk to your boss every time. And sometimes they'll give in and then sometimes I have to talk to their boss. And if their boss says like, well, I'm fine with it, I'll talk to the bigger boss. And eventually I'll try to get them to sign off on that risk. So I'll say, you don't want to fix these things. You know, you feel time's more important than that. Cool. But you need to sign off that you are accepting the risk on behalf of the organization, because for me, this is completely unacceptable. And I do not accept this risk. And when we're in the newspaper someday with a giant breach, it's cool. Your name's going to be in there. It's cool. And then usually someone gives in. And I've worked places where they don't. And there's one place where I resigned in protest because they just wouldn't fix anything ever. And they just didn't want to change. And they didn't want to do any security. And I was like, I won't work here. And that's it. Sometimes
That's the dreadful lesson that we still are learning. And I guess we are still going to learn the same lesson for next couple of years, till the time each and every company decides to shift left and consider security as an integral part and not an external part of the entire SSDLC process itself. But that said, thank you so much, Tanya, for sharing your insights and such amazing guidance and advice. And we are so happy and honored to have you here. And we wish that next year, maybe we can have you physically present at the event. We wish you all the good luck.
Thank you.
Thank you.